I would say communication plays a key role when companies go public. I would even say it's just as important as the lawyer's advice and the calculations by financial consultants. Because in the end, it's all about a successfully developed equity story. And before going public, each company must explain authentically, emotionally, and convincingly why investors should buy shares in this company at this particular time and at this particular valuation. So through strategic and strong communication of the equity story, you can influence a wide range of interests, like strengthening the public awareness of the company, or through this addressing a broad investor base and thus optimizing the issue proceeds, leading to best case oversubscription of the transaction, and at the end the perception as a transaction as a success. So the right communication strategy at the right time is often worth hard cash for the companies. We all know a good story with relevant content is not built up overnight. And in the best case scenario, you develop your success story, including your vision and your potential of your business model and your future perspective to scale further, consistently starting from day one. So the actual IPO process itself later on is strictly regulated with numerous legal frameworks to be compiled with and regulations to observe. And you as a founder or manager team will be very busy then. So in the final months before the IPO, these conditions often leave the communications team with just little room to implement the IPO comms strategy. And this makes it even more important to utilize external corporate communications at an early stage to position the company's profile and segmentation sustainably in the business and in financial media, as well as via news agencies, for example. Yeah, I think the biggest mistake is to think that at the end, nobody cared what was written 2 or 3 years ago, but the media don't forget. So I've seen many founders who exaggerated their statements at an early stage, made promises for the future, set very, very specific deadlines for reaching certain milestones. And then suddenly everything turns out differently. The scaling took longer than expected, or innovations never reached market maturity. The markets were even volatile from one day to the next due to wars or to other crises. And then shortly before the IPO, a critical journalist comes along and asks, hey, why didn't you achieve that target set back then? Did you just gamble, or was the strategy not so good after all? And then worst case scenario, the valuation is in jeopardy. So if an IPO is an option for you in the future, it's always best to seek advice and support from communication experts who can formulate core messages and manage the media in such a way that finally your equity story follows a clear, comprehensible, and convincing line. So one of the biggest challenges is certainly problematic news that the media sometimes drops. Especially, but not only, when these are published shortly before or even during the IPO process. I guess this happened in the IPO process of WeWork, for example, in 2019. So precise leaks are probably the most critical. So, for example, planned IPO becomes public too early and therefore may have to be pushed forward, which has consequences for the marketing strategy. Or the potential valuation is estimated to be significantly too low or too high, deviating from the company targets. So if you have an experienced comms department at your side or experienced external experts and consultants, they generally bring in a good network with proven relationship with the media to manage these situations properly, or even off the record. So these experts are trained to always take critical situations into account and consider a wide range of stakeholders and to manage potential conflicts accordingly. So, for example, when I accompanied the IPO with Mr. Specs in 2021, I had already been on board for about 7 years and was able to consistently steer the company's success story with targeted PR during this time. And the IPO had always been an option, but the right moment was not clear for a long time. But by the time things got serious, we had regularly presented our successful business model with strong and resilient proof points in relevant media over many years. The brand and the company and also the leadership team behind were well known publicly and had built up strong reputation. So our target group of investors already had a positive perception of us, which we were then able to build up in a concrete and strategic way by further sharpening our equity story within the pre-phase of the IPO. And we were able to increase evaluation once again, and we were necessarily steered in the right direction. And we had leaks, but we were able to manage well. And at the end, we even saw that we had a strong spillover effect on the consumer brand due to our broad and convincing communication within that specific IPO year. So all in all, I think this success was only possible because communication was always an important part of Mr. Speck's strategic approach. For example, many founders initially feel flattered when media inquiries reach them and their own business receive public attention in the early stage. So interview requests are quickly accepted. However, you must always be aware that preparation is time consuming and you should take this time. So whenever you have an interview request, ask yourself, who's a journalist who wants to talk to you, and what is the sentiment like for similar articles in the outlet in the past? What message do you want to send, and how can you back up your statement with which figures and proof points? And are there certain topics you don't want to talk about? How do you react if you were asked about them? How do you want to come across, and how not, and so on? So if you feel unsure about this, then it's a moment where you should get help from expert. And it doesn't always have to be an expensive agency. So many experienced external consultants like me can provide support with specific media trainings, for example, or with an initial comm strategy, and even with setting up and guiding your internal team that will then be able to further develop communication on their own over the time. So sometimes it's just a small first steps to take, I would say. Well, of course, the earlier the better. But at the latest, when the talks with the bank starts and the date for the IPO becomes concrete, you need experienced external advice, even if you already have a good in-house comms team. So as the IPO is a very strictly regulated process with many legal requirements, as I said, you also need experience in coordination of communication with lawyers and the banks. So there are several required public notifications that follows a specific form and a clear timetable. Therefore, it's important to have an external partner at your side who can actively manage this process and the media, especially if the company itself is no longer allowed to communicate actively at a certain point in the process. As I said, the earlier the better, but maybe this is really the final call. Take the time early on to familiarize yourself with the communicative needs and its resulting strategy that accompanies an IPO. Do this when you're not yet under time pressure. So the sooner you understand how valuable strong communication is for your storytelling, the more you will realize that it's not about the perfect starting point, but a process that takes years to build up and develop. So it's about just familiarize yourself as early as possible.